Welcome everybody to History's Calling, Where Will It Take You? We are joined today by Jenny Reeder. I have a little bio here about her, so we'll go ahead and read that, and then we'll just launch into some questions that we have for her. Jenny Reeder is a 19th century women's history specialist at the Church History Department in downtown Salt Lake. She earned her PhD in American History at George Mason University, an MA in History, Archival Management, and Documentary Editing at New York University, and an MA in Communication Studies at Arizona State University, and a BA in Humanities and English, teaching at BYU. She has co-authored 2 books on Latter-day Saint women and has worked in Better Days 2020 and the Mormon Women History Initiative. So our hope today is that we get to hear from her about her journey and how students can qualify to be involved in unique opportunities such as she's had, and provide unique perspectives about how her work impacts future projects. So thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us today.
It's a privilege. I love BYU and I'm so happy to be with you all today.
Wonderful. For those of you joining us today, we are asking that if you have any questions, to go ahead and address them to Allison Sundrup, who will have a Q&A at the very end. So thank you so much for any questions that you have. So maybe, Jenny, you can get us started by telling us a little bit about how you got to where you are. What's your story? Give us a little bit of information about your story.
That's such a fun question because I feel like I took a very roundabout route to where I am today. But I think that's important. Like, I thought I wanted to be a high school English teacher. And I loved humanities. That I had hoped to be able to teach that in high schools too. And I think it's because I loved my high school English teachers for the most part. And so that was sort of my plan. However, I did my student teaching and I sort of realized I'm not sure if I am cut out for this. So after I graduated, I applied for like 1 job at my old high school and didn't get it. And so I worked for a year at the United Way of Utah County. And then I had a bishop who said, you need to go to graduate school. And he was a very influential bishop. You need to go to graduate school. And I think you should go to ASU and study human communication. And I'm like, okay. So I went. It wasn't my thing, but I'm not a quitter. So I finished, but I wrote my thesis on quilt in the Relief Society, sort of quilt as rhetoric for the Relief Society. And in between my 2 years at ASU, I knew I did not want to spend the summer in Tempe, Arizona. It is way too hot. And so I had come across, literally, this is so random, I came across a devotional that Carol Cornwell Matson gave at BYU several years ago, even before then. I think this is in 1999. And I emailed her and I said, hey, do you need a research assistant? Guys, the only history classes I had taken at BYU were history of civilization, humanities. And she didn't know me and she said, why, yes. And so I came to Provo and worked for her 1 summer researching Emmeline B. Wells, and I loved it. So after I finished my thesis and graduated from ASU, I emailed her again and I said, I'm looking for a job. Do you have any job openings there? At the time, she worked for what was called the Joseph Fielding Smith Institute for Latter-day Saint History, which was located at BYU. And she said, we don't have any jobs here, but you can come work for me as a research assistant until you find a job. And that was in 2001, and I did that. I came and worked for her, and it turned into a full-time job for 3 years. And I loved it. As I read the Nauvoo Relief Society, I was working with Carol and Jill Mulvager on a project that turned into the book First 50 Years of Relief Society. I realized these women were like speaking to me. They were like whispering to me, and I realized this is what I was put on earth to do. So I worked for them for 3 years, and then they said, you have to get a graduate degree in history So I applied for PhD programs in history and I didn't get accepted because I didn't have a master's degree in history. So that's why, Lindsay, you mentioned my 2 master's degrees. That's why I applied to NYU and got a degree in history, archival management, and documentary editing. I had been working with special collections at BYU and with Connie Lamb, who's a librarian there, and produced an exhibit. This is a long time ago, so none of you probably ever saw it. It was called To Tell the Tale, the history of Mormon women or something like that. But I loved it. I loved working with the archive. And so I thought, well, maybe, the job market's so volatile, maybe I'll get a degree in archival management and end up working in an archive, and that would be lovely. So I have that certificate. I worked with documentary editing, which is not making movies, unfortunately. It is taking documents and editing them and annotating them and putting them together, primary documents. So then my advisor said, you should apply to George Mason University, which I did, and it was fantastic. They specialize, that's in Virginia, right outside of DC. They specialize in digital history. And so I felt like I was just adding all these different aspects of doing history to my repertoire. And then I landed my dream job at the Church History Library.
That's amazing. Well, and it sounds to me like on this journey, you kind of had an idea of what you wanted to do, but then circumstances happened along the way,
right,
that enabled you to get there, right? So it's not like you had kind of a plan,
mm-hmm.
but it sounds like it was just this non-linear experience.
Right. It was very organic. And also, just to throw this little twist in, as I was ABD, which means all but dissertation. So I was a PhD candidate. I'd finished my coursework and my oral exams, and I was diagnosed with leukemia right then. And I was like, oh, this is so stupid. I didn't really realize how serious leukemia was, but I was just mad because I knew what my life mission was, and I felt like things were getting put in my way. But 2 years of chemo and was working on my dissertation, and I was still the first person in my beginning cohort to graduate. And then my advisor told everyone, well, if Jenny Reeder can do it with leukemia, you better do it too. So they all hated me.
That's amazing. And that you feel that it was so much your calling that
Mm-hmm.
that you were given kind of that strength to persevere.
Yeah.
That's just amazing.
Well, not only strength, but it also gave me a reason to fight. You know what I mean? Soon I realized that chemo wipes me out, but it gave me a reason to not curl up in a ball in my bed, but to keep going.
That's amazing. I've read some of your articles online where you talk about the voices of these women. That's in it. Can you describe what that's like feeling that you have this connection, and what has that meant for your work?
Well, gosh, it's meant so much for my work, but it's also meant so much for me personally. I really feel like they've been with me through all of this. My leukemia recurred 3 times, and I had 2 bone marrow transplants, and every time I just felt like I have a mission, and they're with me, and they're cheering me on and being encouraging me. So it's really exciting. For example, let me tell you one story, if that's all right. So I worked with Kate Holbrook at the Church History Department to produce the book At the Pulpit, 185 Years of Discourses by Latter-day Saint Women. And I was in charge of the first half of the book, which was the 19th century part, and Kate was in charge of the second half of the book. Which I soon realized was very different, because she had the internet and everything, right? All the conference talks. I had, from 1830 to 1920, I had to do a lot of digging. And sometimes I would find talks that were just a paragraph long that were so good, especially when you looked at the biography of the women. One example I want to share was I found this talk that was printed in the Women's Exponent. And it was originally given to the young women of the Salt Lake City 11th Ward. And the name was E.G. Jones. And I'm like, okay, I know I want to use this talk. It was such an incredible talk, but I have to figure out who E.G. Jones is. So I did a lot of detective work. I finally had to pull in, I had to pull in some family history specialists to help me. So I love family history people. They have so many skills to find people, lost people. And so we discovered in the Salt Lake City 1870 census a woman named Eleanor Georgina Jones that lived in the 11th Ward. Anyway, then from there, we were able to see that she was born in Nashville, Tennessee. And so we went to, they did, I didn't. The family history people went to the censuses in Tennessee. Do you say censuses? Is that the proper?
Censi?
Nope. Anyway, family history people can tell us that. They went to the census in Tennessee and found that she was listed in, I think it was 1850. And she had a family, she had a mother, and I don't know if this dude was her father, but each of her siblings was born in Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee. They were born all over. The father, or the man, was black. The mother was listed as mulatto or mixed race. That was the term they used then. And all of the children then were mixed race. But in the Utah census, she was white. So it was so interesting. She joined the church in Nashville. They moved to Ohio. She might have joined the church in Cincinnati. I can't remember. Anyway, she would go back and forth between California and Salt Lake City. She had a husband in California who died, and then another husband who died. And she was in the 11th Ward, and she was very educated, and she received her temple ordinances, and her sons received the priesthood. And it's so fascinating because I think she was passing as white. Anyway, this talk is so beautiful, and it's incredible. But she talks in this talk about how you can always pray, and no matter how deep a hole you're in, God will always hear you. And it was so indicative to me of her life, but that we did not find anything else. We couldn't find there was no pictures of her. We knew she died in a certain year in California, but we didn't know where or how. And finally, again, my family history specialist found, I just felt like she wanted to be found. Like she was sending me all these little crumbs. And we found that she died in Redding, California of a stroke. And she'd been there for like 10 days. And she was buried in an unmarked grave. So really, she left no record. And I think part of that was because of her mixed race. But she really was an amazing, articulate woman.
That's incredible. What a unique story. And that you, in your journey, had to connect with other historians to make all this happen and to really get to the meat of what made this person.
Right.
You know, I just think that that's incredible.
It was a lot of fun too, and I loved it. That's how working with the church history department is. It's a lot of teamwork. Like you really have to work together. You have to have other people read your work and revise it. You learn how to not own anything. It's good.
So speaking of some of those skills, and particularly in the church history department, what you're looking for, can you talk to our students about what level of expertise is needed to do some of these projects? I mean, it sounds to me like you have a pretty vibrant internship program, but then, you know, as people kind of enter entry level or senior level, what does that look like?
So I have used a lot of interns from BYU, academic unpaid interns, and they are incredible. And they do some of that. A lot of them have been family history students, but they're also history students. But they do a lot of the work for me. I'm working right now on a project on the discourses of Eliza R. Snow. And we've created a website on the churchhistorianspress.org. If you go there, you will see that. And we found 1,200 discourses, but we had to look through every single minute book, which was over 1,600, to know where to find her. So my interns and volunteers and entry-level people with bachelor's degrees are the ones that help do that. So we, as a research historian at the Church History Department, it's most likely that you will have at least a master's degree, preferably a PhD, depending on your experience.
And does the master's degree, tell us a little bit about master's degrees that you see a lot? Is it solely history? Is it archival library? Like what kinds do you see?
So there are several divisions in the Church History Department. I'm in the publications division, and that's where most of the PhD historians are. But we also have the library division that has people with archival degrees and library science degrees. We also have religious studies people. There's Kate Holbrook is in my division, and she has a PhD in religious studies. But there's also the global acquisitions department or division. And they're the ones, I think it would be so cool to be in this division. They're the ones that go all over the world and work with local church historians to do oral history interviews of people all over the world. This morning we had a department devotional, and the guy giving the message had been to Chile just before the pandemic started. And he talked about his travels through Chile, and it's so cool. A couple years ago, they asked me and my manager to go to Guadalajara, Mexico. They have this giant book fair down there, and they asked us to go down and talk about saints and at the pulpit. And we worked with a local church history person from Mexico City. And we also had a global acquisitions guy with us who translated for us. So it was amazing. So there's a lot of really cool things. And one of the new initiatives of the department is to do more global history. We have such a global church, and it's really important to reflect that. If you've read the first 2 volumes of Saints, it's kind of hard to see that global history other than missionaries in those first 2 volumes. But let me tell you what, the next volumes are going to be full of global histories. So I've also, part of my job is to be on different teams. I've worked with the Global Histories team, and I wrote the Global History for Switzerland. We have oh gosh, you guys, on your Gospel Library app, if you go under History and the Restoration, I think is what it is, you'll find the global histories. Look at them. They're so cool. We're trying to do a global history for every country where the church is officially recognized.
Amazing. So if there was a student that was interested in kind of diving into this, what additional skill sets do you think they would need to bring, maybe aside from a history degree or a family history degree? Do you feel like there are certain things that they should be doing to prepare for something like that?
Yes. Just last week and the week before, a colleague and I interviewed for a position. We interviewed people for a position, it was called a research historian, but it was like a research assistant for both, for the publications division. So both for the Joseph Smith papers and also for other projects in our division. And so one of the questions that we asked was, what is your archival research experience? And also, how comfortable do you feel with paleography or reading old handwriting? Because some of that job requires verification of texts. So you have to look at sometimes handwritten, old, hard to read handwriting and make sure the transcript or the typescript is correct. So I think number 1 is research in archival research, you know, whether that's at the Church History Library or at BYU Special Collections, and then reading old handwriting, and also being familiar with being familiar with church history.
Mhm. Right. I wanted to kind of back up a little bit, but I wanted to talk to you about when you decided on your thesis, the quilt thesis, right? So what were the steps that you had to take? Because I have a lot of students come in and they say, I don't know what, I really love history, but I'm not really sure what my focus should be. And we start to kind of talk through some things, but how did you arrive to the conclusion that that's what you wanted? That's so unique.
Yeah, it is. I think that's a really good question. So I think part of it was because before that, like a year or two before that, I had been wandering through the BYU bookstore, and I don't know if they still have them there, but they had like a clearance bin, or a bin of clearance books. And I found one called Women's Voices, and it was a collection of women's 19th century Mormon women's writings, Latter-day Saint women's writings. And I was like, that's interesting. And it was like $1. So I bought it, and I didn't really open it up to look at it, but then I did later, and I just realized these are such amazing women. The reason why I suddenly became very interested in quilts, I don't know why. I mean, I grew up, it was something my mom and my grandmother did and my great grandmother did. And part of it, I think, was because I was in Arizona, and that's where my great grandmother and grandmother were from. And it was so hot, and I did not like it there. And I had my great grandmother's quilt hanging on my wall, and I felt like she was like a blue ribbon quilter. She was not a member of the church until after she died, when I went to the temple for her. But she was a blue ribbon quilter, and I started to become interested in quilts. And so I started interviewing people who quilted. This is, again, like a human communication program. And so I was doing qualitative research and oral history research, I guess. And I realized that quilts were a major item or artifact for Relief Society. And I started looking at the past and how women had used quilts in the past and what they said. And that's also one thing that I haven't talked about yet. I have loved doing material culture in my historical work. So I love looking at objects and items and seeing what those items tell us about people. Mm. I don't know if any of you have read Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. She's an amazing author and an amazing historian. She has a book called Homespun, and she takes items, one item per chapter, and really teases out what that tells us about the time period, what it tells us about economics and family and religion and the culture and race even. And that caught me. And so I actually wrote my dissertation at George Mason on material culture and artifacts that commemorated the Nauvoo Relief Society. I loved it. It was so fun. I loved it because I felt like a lot of these women hadn't written anything, hadn't left their life stories in journals or letters. And so this was one way that I could find something about them and hear them speak.
That's amazing. And then did you feel that, did you have mentors that encouraged you to pursue this avenue? Did you feel that it was just, you know, a revelation that this was what you needed to do? Like how was that inspired for you?
It was both, but I did have mentors. Those were huge. And at first they were Jill Mulvey-Durr and Carol Cornwell Matson, who I was working for as a research assistant. And they actually, like, I would have kept working where I was the rest of my life, but they said, you have got to get a graduate degree. You can't go anywhere as with just a bachelor's degree. You have got to go to graduate school. And along the way, I joined the Mormon History Association, which is an excellent organization. And I met people and talked to people and found friends there. They have a great student association, part of the Mormon History Association. I got involved with the Juvenile Instructor, which is a blog. And we also, it's a group of students and like junior scholars. And like we have a back channel on Facebook. And so all day long, we're like all over the world, basically asking each other questions or noting things or announcing new things. And they've been an incredible support to me through all of this.
Well, and what I'm hearing in everything that you're saying is that the collaboration piece is really what helps drive this forward, like hearing about stories we've never heard before. And I'm hearing that in mentorship, in networking, in teamwork at your current office. And I just think that that's amazing that it's not a one-person show. It's collective, you know.
So I have to say this, I lived in New York for 2 years when I was at NYU, and I came to know Richard and Claudia Bushman really well. Richard wrote this incredible biography of Joseph Smith, Rough Stone Rolling. And Claudia actually ended up being on my dissertation committee. I needed someone who was familiar with Mormon history. And so she was the one that I chose, and she does some material culture as well. But Richard Bushman always said that the dissertation stage of your academic career is the very loneliest. And it was true because, I mean, I was dealing with chemo. I was at home all day. My roommates were all at work. I couldn't go anywhere. And I was supposedly writing my dissertation. You know, it takes a long time for those ideas to simmer. But I had a good friend, Janice Johnson, who was writing her dissertation, and she was in England at the University of Leicester. She was writing her dissertation about Mountain Meadows Massacre. And she and I would get on Google Chat all day long. And we would joke literally about, she was living alone in her flat, but we would joke all day long about, have you used your human voice today? Which I actually now find in being at home and living alone and working from home is that I don't use my human voice much. So yesterday we had a meeting, a team meeting. I also work on church history topics essays that accompany saints. And we had a team meeting, and probably for the first 45 minutes, we were all at home and we all just chatted about the election and about all sorts of random things. And it was that incredible sense of, oh yeah, I am using my human voice.
Right.
And it gets like this about this time every day, so I have to do it.
Yeah. So early in the morning because you haven't used it as much. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I really appreciate that insight, especially right now as a lot of our students may not have the opportunity to come into the classroom, you know, what you're doing to kind of exercise, because so much of what you do is in your head, and it's typing, and it's thinking, and it's forensic, and so being able to make sure that you're articulating and verbalizing, I think that's crucial. I appreciate that tip.
Yeah.
So I had one more question. What else do you think would be helpful for our students to understand about your experience? Like we talked about kind of the nonlinear path that you took. Is there anything else that you really want to share with our students before we get to the Q&A?
Yes. One thing I want to say is don't worry if you don't know exactly what you want to do. That it takes time and it takes exposure to different things and different people. I also want to, there's two other things I want to say. One is that if you do end up going to graduate school, you really should try to find a place that, even if you don't know what you want to do, that the classes that are listed in that program look interesting and look like classes that you would want to take. I was drawn to a couple of different programs in particular because of that. And then when you start to apply for a PhD, you want to look at people that could be your mentor or your advisor. I remember exploring different PhD programs, and I went to, you guys, I can't remember if it was Boston College or Boston University, but there was a woman that I didn't know, but she sounded interesting in the things that I wanted to do. And I made an appointment to meet with her. I went from DC to Boston. I made an appointment to meet with her, and I walked into her office, and the minute I walked into her office, I was like, nope, there's no way I want to meet with this lady. I mean, not that I didn't want to meet with her, but I didn't want to work with her. because I could tell everything was very messy. The vibe was very hard. And there were like dishes and clothes and books all over her office. And I was like, yeah, no, I need someone who has things in order. So I think that's an important idea. And the other thing is, like, I went to NYU and I thought I would end up staying there for my PhD, but I discovered that the program was very competitive and the professors were very competitive. And you had to compete to get funding. So you want to go to a place where you can get funding, and that's not an issue. But then that made the students become very competitive. And I'm so glad I didn't stay. I went to George Mason, and that's where I was diagnosed with cancer. But everybody was so helpful and cooperative, and we were all on the same team, and we all wanted each other to succeed. So that's the one thing. And then the second thing is how important it is to stay current in your field. So I don't know if you guys did this in elementary school, but we had what we called SSR, silent sustained reading, for like a half an hour or something. And I feel like that, not while you're in school, because I understand how much everyone's reading and stuff, but when you are in a job, is to stay current in your field and maintain that. So like right now, I'm reading the new David Blight book on Frederick Douglass. So obviously it's not a women's history book, but he's so good at looking at memory and rate. And it's important for me to understand that. So I think it's really important to stay current in your field, to belong to different organizations and read journal articles, which I'm not very good at.
Yeah. Well, and then too, in your experience, you had a lot of experiential learning where you put yourself out there and you said, oh, hey, I know that I don't know you, but what kind of opportunities, right?
Yeah.
So even that is huge. You know, we have Allison on here, who's our internship coordinator, and we're pushing real hard that students have that relevant experience along with staying current. And I think that working somewhere will help people stay current, right? So that's really great feedback. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Allison, do you want to take some time here and go through, do we have any questions from our students?
I have a couple questions.
Okay, let's hear them.
So just kind of going off of what you just said with internships, could you talk, I know you did mention, students that come and intern and some of the projects that they work on. Could you maybe just speak a little bit more to the students about what they would specifically be doing, especially right now during internships being remote, and what kind of work and what would their kind of routine look like being able to, and what would their contribution look like?
Yeah. For example, if you were to come work with me on the Eliza R. Snow Discourses project, we need help with text verification. So there's different levels of text verification, and we're at a point where we need people, and you can do this remotely because all of our stuff is digitized. So you have two people, and you can either do this on FaceTime or on, we have Microsoft Outlook, so we use Teams a lot, or on Zoom or something, where one person has the manuscript, the handwriting on a screen, and the other person has the typescript. And the person with the manuscript reads, no, the person with the typescript reads very slowly, and the person with the manuscript makes sure it's correct, even if there's a capital letter or a period instead of a comma or an em dash. So that's one thing that you can do. It's kind of tedious, but you find the coolest things as you're doing that. Another thing that we're doing with this project, I told you my throat would get like this, is we're trying to find, so Eliza travels all over Utah Territory to speak. And we want to include pictures. If you go to the website, you'll see some of them have pictures of the locations where she spoke. So we need interns to do searches both in the church history catalog, online, obviously, and in other places of the buildings where she spoke. But that would mean looking at the Utah Historical Society, at BYU, at the University of Utah, even in local towns. A lot of towns around here have the Daughters of Utah Pioneers, which is this quirky, awesomely weird organization. If any of you have been to any of their museums, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But sometimes contacting them and seeing if they have a picture of the old church that used to be in their town. So stuff like that. And also on the Joseph Smith Papers part, a lot of times the editors, the research historians, the historians on the job will have specific research questions, and they'll ask for interns to go and look up one thing. And that, again, is like detective work. Interns working on global history will be working on a certain country and finding stories of people in that country or experiences of people in that country. So archival experience is awesome.
Well, it sounds like they're going to be working a lot individually, but yet there's still interaction and a great contribution to the projects.
Yes, absolutely. We could not do it without these interns. We love our interns.
Good. Okay, one more question is, so we're talking just a little bit about mentors, these students that are trying to find mentors.
Mm-hmm.
You said that, you know, you went into that one mentor and it just wasn't a good fit, you could tell.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But what about the times when you have somebody in mind that you really want them to be your mentor? How do you go about solidifying that relationship and getting them to be your mentor?
Okay, I have a great story about this. When I went to George Mason University, I thought for sure that I would want to work with Jane Sensor, who does 19th century women. And I did a university visit before I had been accepted. So this is before I chose that school. And I talked to her and she's like, well, I don't think our interests match up very well. And I'm like, oh, they totally do. What do you mean? And she just was like, no, I don't think so. And I was like, I took that, I learned from that experience that she didn't want to work with me. And if she didn't want to work with me, I didn't want to work with her. But she was super nice to me. You know, I never even took a class from her, but every time I saw her in the halls, she knew me and she would ask me how I was doing. So then I had another woman there at George Mason. Her name is Allison Landreth. And she is amazing. She does a lot of work on memory. And I asked her to be my advisor and she said yes. And I was working with her in one of my secondary fields, which was memory and material culture. And I realized that we didn't have a very good working relationship. And she was very critical and not very supportive of me. And there was another woman that I'd been working with who I also wanted on my committee that did 19th century, more material culture and more women and Western history. And I had taken some classes from her and she was kind of weird, but good. And I found myself much more comfortable talking with her. And so I fired my first advisor and switched to Paula, but I actually kept that other woman, Allison, on my committee. But Paula was really helpful. And I knew that, especially through my oral exams and my dissertation, she was very large and in charge, which sometimes was annoying. I mean, she would tell me, oh, I know the truth about polygamy in the church, your church. You still practice it. And I'm like, no, we don't. I promise you we don't. She's like, yeah, but I know the truth. And I knew I could never convince her of that, but so I didn't worry about it, but it wasn't a major part of my dissertation anyway. But she was amazing. And I need to email her and share with her my website on Eliza R. Snow. She would be delighted. She's retired and lives in Montana now. But she also found a publisher for my dissertation. She says, I'm your advisor for life, which is awesome. And I feel very comfortable with that. So that's what I would say. You learn through trial and error.
So it's going to take some work and effort, but you definitely get a good connection or a feel for people.
Yeah, that's crucial. If you don't have someone that will fight for you and work with you, you're never going to make it.
Okay, so find those mentors. Okay, I love that message. Okay, one last question, and then anyone else can answer, but sorry, I'm asking so many, but.
It's okay.
Okay, so thinking about working for the church, because that just seems, you know, like you said, it was a dream job. But it's not an opportunity that opens up to everybody, you know? And so what about these people who are wanting to go and work in a job like this, but it's not opening up for them? What other avenues would you take if, let's say, you wanted to study women's history, especially church history?
So that, first of all, I want to say that I knew that I wanted to study history or Mormon history, and everyone, including Richard Bushman, was like, you need to be really careful and open up, expand, because you're not going to be able to find a niche job like that. But I knew that that was what I was sent to do. So when I was applying to PhD programs, I said to them, I would like to do a dissertation on a Mormon topic. Would that work with your school or with your program? And for example, at George Mason, they said, yeah, we don't know very much about it. And I'm like, I don't need you to know much about it. I need to learn the skills of history and the craft of history from you. And I will find someone that can help me with the actual Mormon part of it. I use Mormon because it's, anyway, Latter-day Saint history.
It's shorter.
It is shorter. I know, now my email address is at churchofjesuschrist.org, and it takes forever. There was something else I was going to say, but I can't remember now. What was the question again?
How do you, like, what other places could a person apply for or work for?
Yes, so I love teaching, and I wanted to teach. And when I graduated, I applied to 3 jobs. One at BYU Religion, one at the University of Utah History, and one at the Church History Department. And I was a finalist in all 3 of those. And then Church History came and said, we would like to offer you the job, but we need to know within this period of time before the other universities had finished their selection process. And I just took it because I was scared. I needed insurance. I couldn't be, my health was an issue, and I couldn't be left. So I took it, and it is a concern because a lot of times it's hard to go from the Church History Department to another academic position, but it is easy to go to another archival position. So I would, especially in this time, and we all know COVID is weird, and it's always later after some event that it affects academic departments and job freezes, hiring freezes. But I would really encourage you to be open. So archives are a great thing. Public history is a great way to be open. Academic departments are, of course, awesome and probably the highest, most desirable for history PhDs. But like, I have a friend who teaches for my graduate program, she teaches at NOVA, which is the Northern Virginia Community College system. And she's there full time. She thought she would be in a 4-year academic institution, but she loves her job. A lot of the people I went to school with, because it was around DC, work for the government. So there's also one of them works for NASA. She did her dissertation on space photography.
Wow.
Yeah, so she worked for NASA while she was going to school. Others do military history and they'll work for the military or whatever. So there's a lot of different options.
Tell them that your insurance probably doesn't cover it.
So lots of different options for that, for places to go. That's neat. I didn't realize some of those other
have it
options
out today.
So that's neat. Hey, wonderful. That's all my questions. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask?
If you guys want to email me too with more specific questions, I'm Lindsay or Allison can give you, or Arnie can give you my email address. I feel really strongly about mentoring myself. I feel like I've had so many great mentors, and I feel strongly about that. So I always try to mentor the students that work with me, or even anybody else.
And what a great opportunity that would be for anybody, really.
Yeah.
Seriously, that would be a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, we cannot even express to you how excited we are to have you. It's just always such a pleasure to reconnect. Jenny actually comes to a lot of our internship and career fairs. I'm not sure what's on the docket for virtual this semester, but students, if you're interested in knowing more or connecting with her, please, I put our contact information in the chat, so please reach out to us. And Jenny, thank you so much for everything that you're doing to expose these stories that we've never heard before. The work
Yeah.
you're doing is just incredible, and you have been absolutely prepared and the person that needs to be part of that work. That's amazing. So
Thank you. And I want to say to all the students, good luck. This is a weird time. Who knows how this semester is going to end up, but stick with it and use your human voice if you're at home all day doing Zoom classes. But hang in there and you'll figure out what your direction needs to be. It'll come.
great. Well, thank you. We will conclude our webinar. So if anyone wants to stick around, you can, but I think that this is the end.
Jenny, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.